But we have to challenge the corporate media. In the United States, you have the networks. NBC is owned by General Electric, one of the major weapons manufacturers. Is it any accident what we watch on TV or military hardware shows, cheerleaders for war? And it matters because, they're private corporations, but they don't own the airwaves. The airwaves are a national treasure. They're the public's airwaves. They're the place where we have to hash out the most critical issues of the day. This land is your land. And the way you protect it is by challenging these corporations to open up, to allow those thinkers, those activists, those people who think outside the box, think of the TV screen as that box that boxes us in. On Democracy Now!, we break all of the standard wisdom about what appeals to people on television or in radio. You're supposed to have 8-second sound bites, especially kids. They can't tolerate anything more, the whole MTV thing. It's the opposite. Young people, Democracy Now! Turns public radio and television on its head, bringing in a younger, more diverse audience. Because to hear someone start in one place and take a journey with you somewhere else, how they arrive, it's called critical thinking. How you start one place and end up in a very different place. You got to hear how someone does that, how they arrive at a completely different conclusion that isn't reinforcing the status quo. We can't afford the status quo anymore. Global warming, the global economic meltdown. It's dissent that will save us. And we need a media that is safe for dissent. We need to be able to traverse borders without being afraid that that dissent will be squelched, that you'll be monitored, that you'll be surveilled, that you'll be watched. Dissent is essential to the functioning of a democratic society. And so we bring you people like, Tim DeChristopher. How many of you remember him as I stand here at the University of Victoria, to bring you the story of another student, Tim DeChristopher, is an economics student at the University of Utah, Salt Lake City. The piece is called Bush and the Monkey Wrench Guy, or One Man's Bid to Aid the Environment. It was last December, a year ago, and Tim was taking his economics exam. One of the questions in the exam was, if the oil and gas companies are the only ones who bid on public lands, are the true costs of oil and gas exploitation reflected in the prices paid? Tim was inspired. He finished his exam, he threw on his red parka, and went off to the controversial Bureau of Land Management land auction, that's BLM, land auction, that the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance called the Bush administration's last great gift to the oil and gas industry. Instead of joining the protest outside, he thought, what is a land auction? Like, how does it work? And he went inside, and he saw that they weren't bonding the bidders, so he picked up paddle 70, and he started bidding on the public land. And he didn't stop. He ended up buying 22,000 acres of public land. That is, he successfully bid on the public properties located near the Arches and Canyonlands National Parks and Dinosaur National Monument and other pristine areas. The price tag more than $1.8 million that he just didn't happen to have in his wallet at the time. He only came on Democracy Now! Right after that, and he said, once I started buying up every parcel, they understood pretty clearly what was going on. They stopped the auction, some federal agents came in and took me out. I guess there was a lot of chaos. They didn't really know how to proceed at that point. They arrested him. Patrick Shea became his lawyer. Patrick Shea is the former director of the Bureau of Land Management. Never assume who your opponents are. Because in this time of such dire crises, I really think conservative and liberal lines are breaking down. It's certainly the case for the millions of viewers and listeners and readers of Democracy Now! I mean, it absolutely crosses the political spectrum. Conservative Republicans, like progressives, like independents, like Democrats, care about corporate control, care about issues of privacy, yes, even war and torture. There's a lot more common ground than is evidenced by this artificial 8-second soundbite debate fisticuffs on television. I really do think that those who are opposed to war and those who are opposed to torture are not a fringe minority, not even a silent majority, but the silenced majority, silenced by the corporate media, which is why we have to take it back. I mean, FAIR did this study, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, FAIR.org, a media watch group in New York, of the 4 major nightly newscasts in the United States 5 weeks before the invasion of Iraq. They looked at NBC Nightly News, ABC World News Tonight, CBS Evening News, and the PBS NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. PBS is like CBC. In the 2 weeks around then Secretary of State Colin Powell giving his push for war at the United Nations, there were 393 interviews done around war. Guess how many were with anti-war leaders? This was when half the population was opposed to the war. 0 is an underestimate. 3 is a Democracy Now! Listener. Yes. 3. 3 of almost 400. You weren't that off with 0. 3 of almost 400. That is no longer a mainstream media. That's an extreme media beating the drums for war. Someone asked me recently what I think of the mainstream media. I think it would be a good idea. So, Patrick Shea, a former director of the Bureau of Land Management, represents Tim DeChristopher. He told the Deseret News, what Tim did was in the best tradition of civil disobedience. He did this without causing any physical or material harm. His purpose was to draw attention to the illegitimacy and immorality of the process. There's a long tradition of disrupting land development in Utah. In his memoir, Desert Solitaire, Edward Abbey, the writer and the activist, wrote, "Wilderness, the word itself, is music. We scarcely know what we mean by the term, though the sound of it draws all whose nerves and emotions have not yet been irreparably stunned, deadened, numbed by the caterwauling of commerce, the sweating scramble for profit and domination." Edward Abbey's novel, The Monkey Wrench Gang, inspired a generation of environmental activists to take direct action disrupting so-called development. As the Salt Lake Tribune reported on Tim DeChristopher, he didn't pour sugar into a bulldozer's gas tank. He didn't spike a tree or set a billboard on fire. But wielding only a bidder's paddle, a University of Utah student just as surely monkey-wrenched a federal oil and gas lease sale Friday, ensuring that thousands of acres near 2 southern Utah national parks won't be open to drilling anytime soon. So let me give you the latest on Tim DeChristopher. He was arrested under the Bush administration, right? And then Ken Salazar, the former senator from Colorado, becomes the Interior Secretary. And the whole land auction, Tim DeChristopher succeeded in nullifying the whole auction because he not only bought up all this land, like 22,000 acres, but for the land he didn't win, he drove up the prices for the oil and gas companies because he kept picking up his paddle. So it nullified the whole thing. And then there were a number of days that the auction could be repeated, and that went into the Obama administration, and Ken Salazar said it wouldn't be re-auctioned. That's very significant. But also under the Obama administration, Tim DeChristopher was charged with a number of felonies, and he's going to trial now. He faces many years in prison, this economics student at the University of Utah. And he lost a big round last week, the beginning of the trial, because he wanted to raise a global warming defense. And among those he wanted to testify was James Hansen. He's one of the leading climatologists in the world. He was the head of the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies. And he himself just got arrested in Virginia protesting mountaintop removal of coal mining. And the judge said no. So now it's just going to be this case of sort of this fraud that was perpetrated. This kid walks into this auction and starts buying up land. But as Patrick Shea said, his attorney, it won't be the first time that someone claimed they had money that they didn't.